Good morning. Welcome back to the Junius Maltby channel. Let's talk about silver prices update. Perfect storm brewing for $50 silver. There are some other stories we're going to cover. However, this is one that's there's a couple articles out there, some charts I wanted to talk about and look at. And coming from me, just a little background, I'm one of the more conservative people when it comes to my approach at what the silver price most likely should be and what its actual valuation is. I never really pin it down to an exact dollar amount. But I'm not one of the people that believes silver should be in the stratosphere, the multitude of thousands of dollars an ounce. But I do believe there is a balance, a happy medium, a middle ground from where it is today, which I believe is lower than it should be when I look at mining costs, supply, demand, many different variables. Its price points throughout history, what its purchasing power has been in history, and facts like that. But let's look at what this author, Michael Lombardi, here has written up, and it's going to take us in a couple different directions. And then there's another article I want to piggyback on this one with some pretty cool charts showing what silver could potentially do. Recently, we talked about the solar panel situation, and I did do a video on silver prices in relation to that. Here we read that demand for silver is growing quickly while supply remains constrained. Those are 2 points that we've beat into the ground. That is true. The result of which will be higher silver prices ahead. Demand for silver, where it's coming from. In April of this year, 835,000 ounces of silver were sold in American Eagle coins. In May, it was more than 2.45 million ounces. This represents an increase of 194% month over month for American Eagle silver coins. This is right out of the U.S. Mint. According to Gartner Incorporated, a research and advisory company, in the first quarter of 2017, 380 million smartphones were sold globally. Sales of these phones increased 9.1% year over year. Okay, so remember that number. 380 million smartphones were sold in the first quarter globally. Now read this. The United States EPA states that 1 million phones, just 1 million, contain 772 pounds of recyclable silver. We're going to go to this link here in a second just so you can look at that. Electronic Recyclers International, Inc. Keeps track of the contents of these devices and how much metal is in them. Now I did some quick math, and this is going to blow your mind. Now remember, this is only the first quarter. Oh, the first quarter. There's 4 quarters in a year. 4 quarters in a dollar. Now you take 380 million smartphones sold globally. I think these are the disposable devices. People throw these away. I mean, they end up in landfills sometimes. So a lot of this metal can sometimes be unrecoverable because not everyone recycles. People even lose them. But that's besides the point. 380 million. Well, we know there's 770 pounds per million cell phones, right? Okay, 380 times 772. I came up with 293,360 pounds of silver alone in the first quarter used for phones. That is 4,278,166.67 troy ounces. At today's price of $17.61, we're looking at $75,338,515 and a nickel worth of silver. $75 million worth of silver in the first quarter alone going into cell phones. You keep this pace up and we start selling more cell phones globally, and everyone has one. I don't have a smartphone. I got a little flip phone, but regardless of what Junius does, I'm sure a lot of people are using these devices. And as it spreads, I mean, this is a consumption of precious metals that, 20 years ago did not exist. Did not exist 20 years ago. Brief interruption. I followed his link to that other page and found this blog here on how many precious metals are found in electronic devices. Here you see the EPA gives some numbers on the staggering amount of precious metals we have in our electronics. Quote, 1 metric ton of circuit boards can contain 40 to 800 times the amount of gold and 30 to 40 times the amount of copper mined from 1 metric ton of ore in the United States, unquote. The EPA also lists that cell phones alone contain gold, silver, platinum, palladium, copper, tin, and zinc. Those recovered materials can then be used in plating, jewelry, electronics, cars, and art. So what we need is some of these silver pourers and these guys here on the channel with their little furnaces to figure out how to start smelting down all of our old electronics and purifying the metal contents. I'd love to see some of the friends out there, old Mr. Zeke and the silver pouring bench guys and Pit Bullion, start pouring out little bars of palladium and gold and platinum by taking all of the community's cell phones and just grinding them up, pulverizing them, and melting them down. But that's besides the point. Let's keep going here. To put some more numbers on it, the EPA states that for every 1 million cell phones recycled, we can get these amounts of precious metals. So look at these numbers, staggering. 35,274 pounds of copper. There we see the 772 pounds of silver, 75 pounds of gold, 33 pounds of palladium. So there is, you take those silver, gold, and palladium alone, and you multiply those pounds times what we saw as, that's per million phones, times the 380 it was in the first quarter alone. 380 million phones sold worldwide. So if you multiply that times 4 and you get a year number, we're looking at some staggering amounts of metal being consumed for the production of these electronic devices being sold globally. Here you can see silver at the supply side. Now, on the supply side of the silver equation, things are looking tight. Mexico is the world's largest silver producing country. The table below shows the year-over-year percentage change in monthly silver production in Mexico. And as you can see, in February it dipped a little bit, but it's really not that much growth. It's more down years than up years. We're seeing decreases of 18 to 20% on each one of these months here: August, September, October, November, December. And we covered that in a recent video on the production, where we talk about production of silver. Now some of the big mines, their production is dropping. Silver prices, the perfect storm. Economics 101, when demand increases and supply declines, prices move higher. Very basic concept, very true. We also covered this in a recent article and discussion we did on silver, on the supply and demand of it. What I see in the silver market is a perfect storm of rising demand and constant supply brewing, which I believe will ultimately result in higher silver prices. The author states that he expects $50 an ounce of silver sooner than most investors can imagine. Just looking at the silver-gold ratio alone historically reiterates his point and causes me to believe that silver does have a tremendous upside. And we're not even done with today's story. Wait till you see some of the charts we are going to discuss soon. A chart pattern that promises of stunning movements in silver prices. June 6, 2017. Here we'll look at some of the charts this author puts up and what he has to say about them. What this chart setup tells us is that silver could fall to $15, even a bit lower, in the coming months. Once below 15, it could set up for another dominant trend, which is not visible on the 11-year chart. Once above $19 to $20, it would break out from its series of lower highs, although the ultimate breakout test would be the $20 to $21 area. We will soon find out if our silver price forecast for 2017 will be achieved or not. Taki Saklanos. Now, I'm not a big, one of those history chart guys. I don't put a lot of weight on them, but I like reading certain viewpoints like this and looking at the trends and how guys talk about different historical patterns and waves and such. But again, there's always circumstances and things taking place globally and in the economies that can really cause these trends and these patterns they talk about in charts to not go the way they predict. So I don't put a whole lot of weight on them. Here is another one. A real breakout in silver prices is coming. Silver bull Leor Gantz, editor of Wealth Research Group, discusses why he places silver at the top of his natural resources rankings. Here you can see a NASDAQ market capitalization, US GDP ratio. Biggest take home I got from this chart was that we are in the extremely overvalued crash warning zone. These guys are looking at the potential for the NASDAQ to correct radically. You see a dramatic drop off in the NASDAQ, and we looked at that chart yesterday. If you remember, it showed silver and the NASDAQ and how they would often trade places. One would rise, the other one would fall, and just that pattern there. Well, if this happens and we see a NASDAQ correction and it plummets, while silver is below it, you'll see that silver rise up and pass up the NASDAQ in its price valuation. Anyway, that was just an interesting chart we looked at yesterday, and it kind of reminded me, this chart here reminded me of that one and that conversation there. All right, out of the last 6,162 trading days, going back to the beginning of 1993, the NASDAQ has been more overvalued than today, with a market cap GDP ratio exceeding its current level of 45.8% on a total of only 201 trading days, or 3.26% of the time. Here's another one. How did this precious metal bring so much desperation and frustration to investors? This is the real assets at all-time lows relative to financial assets. And the author's point here, he mentions in the article that at no time in history have real assets been cheaper than right now. When you look at how much fiat it takes to purchase these real assets, these commodities, and we're going to look at one of them in particular, the one we're talking about. The U.S. economy always peaks as job growth reaches maximum employment, and then a recession follows. This is the fate of the U.S. economy in the next few quarters as well. What does this mean for silver then? Higher inflation rates, a weaker dollar, and cheap Chinese shares have propelled silver from its lows in the early 2000s to close to $50 per ounce at its peak a number of years ago. Look at where the S&P ratio is right now. Philadelphia Gold and Silver Index S&P ratio. Even so, silver is cheaper than you think. In fact, it's cheaper than almost anyone can imagine. It's the only commodity 66% cheaper than 37 years ago. Here's the GSCI S&P 500 ratio. Equities expensive, commodities cheap. The index is down by 75% from the historical median, which translates to a 400% upside just to reach equilibrium. But the juniors will perform much better than that. Okay, you look at this chart here, and what we just talked about, silver is essentially undervalued or cheaper as a commodity than it was 37 years ago. So there you go, some interesting food for thought on silver prices, where it is and where it could fit in the next coming years. Let's move on to beginning of the end for coins is arguable. Is the end of monetary life as we know it on the horizon? We've heard this before, but progress marches on, not always taking traditional ways of life with it. Now the beginning of the end for coins and banknotes may be at hand shortly, according to some observers, as reported in the March 31 Vancouver Sun newspaper. Those observers appear to include Moneris, a payment technology company that in September 2016 predicted cash payments will represent only 10% of all transactions in Canada by 2030. Moneris said payments will be made primarily by credit and debit cards as well as mobile solutions. We've seen this push for the cashless society. We've been reading about it and covering it, the war on cash, for quite some time. This article covers just the technology trend and what's possibly coming. However, the one key point I want to mention and bring out from this article, I'm not going to read the whole thing and go through it. As a matter of fact, this is it. This is the only line I want to share with you, is one of the greatest arguments posed in favor of retaining physical cash is privacy. Is Big Brother watching? Could Big Brother seize or freeze all your cash assets if all currency is digitized? And not only Big Brother, hackers, other nefarious activities, or individuals that find their ways into the web or the internet. Do you trust all of your wealth to be in some digital cloud held up there? And the other funny thing about that is, and I'm going to make a video about this, is we just looked at how much metal is required to maintain these electronic devices and get them to function. So in a way, the very infrastructure that is required for a cashless society requires the existence and the use of precious metals. Apparently, the garbage liberal state of Illinois is reaching near junk. S&P Moody's downgrade Illinois to near junk, lowest ever for a U.S. state. Oh, they're making history. No end to budget impasse sends state to the brink of junk rating. State appropriations debt cut to below investment grade. Illinois had its bond rating downgraded to one step above junk by Moody's Investors Service and S&P Global Ratings, the lowest ranking on record for a U.S. state, as the long-running political stalemate over the budget shows no signs of ending. Well, that makes sense. It's not surprising in the least, and good for Illinois. At least you're number one in something. Aside from murders, I guess that's the other one you're number one in. Chicago's number one in murders and shooting deaths, and now you're number one in junk status. So, way to go, liberalism. Way to run a state into the ground. All right, thanks for tuning in to the Junius Maltby channel. Hope you enjoy the material, the content. Like, share, subscribe, share it. Participate down in the comments section. Very interesting material, some neat little facts and tidbits of information uncovered today. And I hope you guys all enjoy the material. Thank you. Have a good day.